blockchains are created equal, and often what distinguishes them is governance. And that is why we are talking about blockchain networks governance. Our moderator is the best possible, world-renowned crypto lawyer, Gordon Einstein, founder of CryptoLaw Partners. He's joined by Dr. Ben Goertzel, the founder and CEO of Singularity Net, creator of the robots Sophia and Grace. We also welcome Dr. Millie Perry, who is the chair of DAOs for DAOs and Bug Blockchain Global. Rounding out the panel is Tom Trowbridge, the co-founder of Fluence Labs. So now you're ready, let's talk governance. On parle de gouvernance.
It's Gordon Einstein, and this, of course, is Africa Blockchain Week. I'm very happy to be moderating a panel on DAOs and open source software with our expert panel, people far smarter than I might add. We're going to go and have them each introduce themselves, give them sort of the 2-minute version, no more, of their origin story, like the Wolverine, like the superheroes that they are, and say where they're from, how they got into crypto and blockchain, and what their interest is in DAOs and open source, and all under 2 minutes. So, Miley, please, we'll start with you.
Well, nice to be here. My name is Millie Perry. I'm from Israel. I have a PhD in information science and another one in art economy. With the help, the second research I dealt with art economy, I fell into blockchain, like fell in love into blockchain. And since my origin, I dealt with knowledge management and organization theories, the DAO is my best research interest, and I'm all focused on it.
There you go, right to it. Tom, please.
Thanks. Great to see you again, Gordon. Great to be here. My name is Tom Trowbridge. I got into the blockchain space by way of investment. I first was looking at Bitcoin, and I remember someone sending me a whole map of the ecosystem. I was just completely overwhelmed and didn't know where to start. But I ended up investing in a company called Swirl, which was the parent company of Hedera Hashgraph. Got to know Manson Lehman, and they asked me to come on board and help found Hedera, which is the public version of Hedera Hashgraph. So built that up with them for a couple of years, launched it, built a governance. So with IBM, Nomura, Deutsche Telekom, really built kind of what I think is kind of the premier institutional oriented blockchain governed by institutions for institutional level deployments. Left. And now I'm co-founder of Fluence Labs, which is a peer-to-peer open application platform, which has a significant amount to do with open source, which we're gonna, I think I'll go into in a little bit later.
Very good, Ben.
Hey, so I'm Ben Goertzel. I originally came from the AI field, focused on building artificial general intelligence and applying AI across various vertical areas. But I've been interested in decentralized networks since many decades back, and since blockchain technologies became more mature, I've been interested in rolling out AI of various sorts across decentralized networks. And so I launched Singularity Net in 2017, which is the first really large-scale decentralized blockchain-based network. And I mean, DAOs have always been obvious to me as the natural sort of governance mechanism to go along with decentralized networks, whether these networks are for AI or for anything else. And I'm pushing forward as fast as I can to get decentralized AI applied in everything that's going on the planet, because I think that's sort of critical toward the next stages of development of the economy for everyone.
That's a big mission. I'm aligned with your mission, and I wonder if it's slightly a dangerous mission, but we'll get into that. Millie, can you give us a good definition of DAO, and can you give us a good definition of open source? Anyway, but you have to be off mute. That's good. That's the key moment.
Sorry for that.
That's okay.
We had to do that.
You're teasing us with your
in
knowledge.
a presentation.
Yes.
Yeah. So
DAOs and open source, what do they mean?
well, I can say that DAO is dealing with governance in 3 dimensions. Okay, it deals with the decision rights, it's dealing with accountability, and in incentives.
Decision
Open
rights,
source,
accountability, and incentives. I've never heard it put that way, but that's
incentives.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it is kind of a theoretical framework dealing with governance and some open question within those dimensions. In relate to decision making, we deal with question like how are decisions made in the blockchain economy or in the DAO, and how are decision management rights and decision control rights allocated. In relate to accountability, we usually want to figure out how is accountability determined in the blockchain economy or in the blockchain system. How is identity relate to that in how do you find the identity of the person or the machine or the mechanism that you deal with, and how is the transaction enforced in this economy or ecosystem. And dealing with incentives, we usually try to understand how is consensus incentives in the blockchain economy created or crystallized, and how does incentives align the members of the ecosystem. So there is a series of a few dimensions and a few questions we have to deal with.
And Gordon, if I could add on to that definition a little bit, which is that if you think about the promise of blockchain, it's about decentralization. And we think of decentralization in terms of protocols, but with DAOs, I think a way to think about them are decentralization of decision-making, not just of technology. And so you can't have true decentralization unless the decision-making body is also decentralized. And so a great deal of thought and art goes into designing how to actually create an organization that doesn't have a hierarchy and doesn't have a leader the way a traditional corporate or government structure does. And so I think that when you kind of consider it to be a leaderless organization that is just, architected by a set of rules, I think that goes, goes somewhat of the way to defining it, but which is a hard thing to do because there haven't really been very many corollaries to it in the past.
Interesting. And maybe you said that, so let me just drill on it. What makes open source open source?
I think
software itself, not DAOs.
Yeah, no, open source, I guess, I would just say open source is, we can go back to Richard Stallman here and say free software is free to use, but it's not free like is in free beer, which means you can actually use it and use it for you, whatever you want to do. It's open for you to do that. You may actually charge you for it, but you can then, he would argue, and I just think he's one of the founders of the space, some would disagree with this, you actually pay for it, but once you have it, you're free to operate it, change it, do whatever you want with it. And so the code is open and available to be changed, modified, and extended in any form a developer wants. That's I guess, the most broad definition I can think of.
And the intersection between DAOs and open source software is?
I think they're both, open source software is often designed by leaderless communities or communities that don't, I wouldn't say leaderless, but communities that have don't have formal structures. And so there I'd go back to kind of Cathedral versus the Bazaar of Eric Raymond, and throwing all these references out where
I'm old enough to get every single one of them so far.
I don't know, so far. It means I am too, but I guess where you have non-hierarchical, how about that, organizations that are viewed today as if not more efficient in writing code. And there is a link between that lack of hierarchy and a DAO, but they're not the same thing.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but
Ben,
I think
so,
I think the first issue. Sorry for jumping in.
It's okay. Go ahead.
The term of community. You know, open source is a community. You have to have a community in order to grow and develop itself and the ideas that around the open source. And so is DAOs. The main question, I think, is what is the first creating the community? Is it a business target, or the community is it?
Well, I would like to distinguish the conceptual notion of a decentralized autonomous organization from the formal category of things that are labeled DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, and these have some overlap, right? But not 100%. So you could look conceptually at a decentralized autonomous organization as any organization of people or software processes or agents in general, which is governing and controlling itself without a central leader. And if you look at it that way, I mean, the Linux community is a decentralized autonomous organization, and has been so a long time before the term DAO came out. And you can see in the Linux community, as an example, many of the subtleties that exist in DAOs as well, right? So I mean, open source, meaning software where the source code is open for anyone to see, and coming along with copyleft and similar mechanisms for propagation of modifications to the code. I mean, open source helps the decentralized autonomous organization of Linux stay together. But then you also have things like the kernel team, which is a sort of self-organizing oligarchy, but which is not as entrenched as, say, the board of IBM or something, right? Because if the kernel team stopped doing its job, some other kernel team would pop up. And this is the sort of thing discussed in the Cathedral of the Bazaar and various other follow-on discussions to that, is within the decentralized autonomous organization of an open source community, like to what extent do you have emergent oligarchies that exist for a while and do things? What is the role of a charismatic leader conceptually and inspirationally, even though you have this decentralized mechanism, right? But now you have the formal label of a DAO, which has emerged within the cryptocurrency world, and there's a lot of promise there, which is you can use blockchains, you can use cryptocurrencies and other non-currency based applications of smart contracts. You can use this to enable decentralized governance in an organization. On the other hand, arguably, a lot of the things that have been labeled DAO in the crypto world are not really DAOs in terms of their operation, because DAO has just become a cool label to us.
Well, Ben, let me ask you a question. I think either Dan Larimer or his dad posited that you can't have a functioning DAO unless you have an internal token, because the requirement of a DAO is its own economy.
Well, that really depends how you're defining a DAO, right? So, I mean, if you take the words literally and say you have a decentralized autonomous organization,
well, I think his idea was the autonomy comes from the economy
in governance, right? And of course, you can have things like offer networks or self-organizing barter networks mediated by smart contracts, which have economy without money, right? So, I mean, in my mind, you could have a decentralized autonomous organization that is not focused on economy, but is focused on producing something like software, or just exchanging art among people or something, right? Which is an economy only in a broad sense. You could also have an economic DAO which uses barter or something rather than a token, or you can have a DAO that has a token. I mean, a token is a very nice way to organize things, and it's a very convenient way to incentivize things, but it's not the only way to do it. But it's also true that just having a token and labeling yourself a DAO doesn't make you really be a DAO. And having a democratic governance mechanism that looks nice on paper, but having 90% of your tokens owned by one guy or one organization and therefore dominating every vote, that doesn't make you genuinely have a DAO either, right? So I mean, there's a lot of things labeled DAO that are not, where the governance is in principle quite centralized because one organization owns the majority of tokens and dominates any vote. And then is it really a DAO? Is it really more a DAO than the Linux community? Which
and Gordon, I would agree.
Democratic and decentralized? Of course not. So
yeah, I would agree with a lot of what Ben's saying, and I would say that I'm a huge, crypto fan and supporter, but it's not the answer to everything. And there's plenty, a really good organization mechanism for DAO is reputation. And reputation does not have to be, manifest or exhibited via a token. And so I think you can have lots of ways to run a DAO that are not token based. So I don't think we have to sort of be that narrow in thinking about ways they can be organized. But so I'll just.
Well, I'm gonna break the fourth wall a little bit. Are you familiar with Wolf Call?
Of course, Dev DAO.
Yes, but I'm involved with it. Of course.
That's what I was referencing. Definitely.
Yeah.
Beat me to it.
I mean, I'm not going to pitch it here, but
he should be here.
He should be here, but you know what?
Or Timothy Lewis.
Yeah, I talk to them too much anyway. I talk to them every day, like too much. No, we should. We'll get him on next. But you're right. I mean, reputation. Well, sorry. Let me swing it all around. I mean, this is Africa Blockchain Week. The topic is DAOs and open source. Is there any particular application for? And I'm going to use a cliche, but I'm just going to go there for these methodologies in a developing economy or developing legal framework or non-legacy environment like Africa, like Latin America?
There's certainly opportunity there, right? And I mean, I've been doing work in Africa, especially Ethiopia, for some time. I co-founded the first AI and robotics company in Ethiopia in 2014, and we're now working with Singularity and with Cardano and Addis and looking at rolling out into other African countries. So clearly, traditional corporate models are not as successfully entrenched in the developing world, in Africa in particular. So there's, in theory, there's an opportunity for technology leapfrogging there, right? And leapfrogging to new forms of organization. And I think actually that DAOs that are not focused on their own liquid tradable token might even have more potential in the developing world, just because they're not going to be immediately outlawed by the government, right? Like not every African country is happy with altcoins trading, and there's not going to be local exchanges in every African country anytime soon. But they're not necessarily opposed to using blockchain networks to organize and coordinate people in more creative ways. So I mean, I think there's tremendous potential in many regards. So one area you could look at is liquidity pools for micro lending and credit. I mean, right now, sort of microfinance has become mostly a scam in the developing world, although it didn't start out that way. I mean, it started out genuinely wanting to help low income people borrow money, but they're certainly.
Well, I got to ask. Well, what I remember all that. What is the scam aspect of it now?
Well, scam may be a little strong, but there's a lot of banks doing microfinance, which are basically just loan sharks, right? I mean, so that's it is largely just turned into a upgraded loan sharking business for the benefit of the banks rather than the social good thing. And but see, it could be locally run, right? You could have liquidity pools bottom up from local people and microfinance popping up that way, thus preventing banks from dominating it. And blockchain could enable that. That needs regulatory buy-in though, right? Because I mean, you can't just, in every country, you can't just start a liquidity pool and call it a decentralized microfinance. I mean, supply chain is another thing. Like say, look at gold mining in Ghana, say, or minerals in any mineral-rich African country. I mean, you've got all these sort of small miners mining gold, minerals, precious jewels, and so forth. The supply chain for this stuff is very disorganized and corrupt, frankly, in many African nations. So, I mean, having a blockchain network that had decentralized governance for mining supply chains would be transformative, and it's. I mean, the opportunity is there. Because
so I'm gonna ask our Middle Eastern Israeli expert because I can feel thoughts coming. So go ahead.
Yeah, I have to say that I think that I endorse the idea that we've heard here. I think the frog leap will come from the CBDC, even though it's not open source nor DAOs. I think the government, because they don't have those legacy systems, they can imply and bring some new systems, applied blockchain into the government system, bringing central bank digital currencies infrastructure. And this infrastructure can endorse a lot of economical usage in food industry, in healthcare industry, drugs, that is very important. A lot of using the nature of communities that is embedded in the national communities in Africa. And I think once we have the infrastructure and the regulation from the government using the blockchain for CBDC, we would see a real frog leap in implementing huge amount and huge number of applications, because we will have the basics. And then the application will be built on top of, and the nature of communities will, the people in Africa used to work in rural areas and so on, they could really benefit from that.
Interesting. Now I'm gonna be a little bit controversial. What can go wrong with DAOs? Is there such a thing as an evil DAO?
I don't know, but I think the main issue is to focus on the point in the life cycle. At the beginning, you have to be more centralized, no matter what, even though you're endorsing decentralization and dissemination and so on, you have to bring money, you have to incorporate the members, you have to initiate the DAO in more centralized operation, and then you have to make it more democratic.
Yeah, so one thing that can go wrong is your progressive decentralization doesn't progress, right? I mean this is correct that, in practice, most DAOs are not bubbling up sort of in a diffuse way from a huge community of people. Like, there's a few people who come up with an idea for the DAO, and they're setting it up, and there's software to be built and tested, and there's marketing to be done. And so the DAO is beginning in a centralized way with an idea of progressively decentralizing, and even a concrete plan for progressively decentralizing. And I'd say this is largely a story that's unfolding now, right? I mean, you are seeing some projects that began more centralized gradually, ceding more and more control to democratic mechanisms, but it's still incomplete.
Ben, let me ask you.
It's quite recent that we have these smart contract based DAOs at all. So it is also understandable that we haven't yet seen huge examples of progressive decentralization fully succeeding, but this story will be told.
Hold on, I gotta ask you: is Cardano decentralized?
Well, I think.
Tom's smiling.
Charles refers to
decentralized mechanisms.
No. Hold on, Ben. Is Cardano decentralized?
Partially.
All right, that's a good answer, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, only thing I laugh when I see Charles's videos goes, my developers, my this, my that. What? Are you kidding me? That's decentralized?
Well, as a
Don't tell
blockchain,
Charles.
It's a
Don't tell
community
Charles
spirit.
it's decentralized.
Community spirit.
well,
Charles doesn't know.
as a formal blockchain network with the
I
staking
know.
pools and so
I'm
forth,
kidding around, obviously.
So am I
Yeah.
slightly. But I know Charles, and you mentioned your work in Ethiopia and you're integrated with Cardano, and I think I recently saw that the validator network is now fully decentralized. He says, so I thought I would do it.
well, the validator network,
a lateral
the validator
T.
network is right. I mean, as a formal software network, the Cardano validator network with the staking pools and so forth. So that is now decentralized, right? But if you look at the overall community of Cardano and the development efforts going on to build the software, the recruiting efforts to get companies on there, of course, this is heavily driven by IOHK and Emergo and so forth, which have CEOs and are directing things in a certain way. So, but I think this gets at a key point with any mode of governance and with democracies in countries as well. I mean, it's never just about the formal system. It's about the formal system together with the culture of the people involved. And you can have a beautiful constitution for a country, but if the mindset isn't democracy oriented, people will be finding ways to work around that and make it be not democratic anyway. And I mean that's the same.
Well, you mentioned the charismatic leader factor like about 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago.
There's charismatic leader factor, and there's also there's other subtler cultural factors also. I mean, there's how much openness and transparency is there just in the communication among the participants in the community. There's reputation was mentioned. There's, I mean, how much gaming of the implicit or explicit reputation systems is there? Like how much are people faking each other out to get fakely high reputations and then influence the network as opposed to
Yes, Wolf should be on this call
based on genuine contributions.
Well, by the way, if anybody wants to read a good book about how that works, I suggest Out of the Ether. It's a very good book about the early days of Ethereum. By the way, Gordon, I'm
going to Amazon right now. But
you're referring to the decentralized Ethereum?
No, I'm just talking about how the personalities and the difficulty in how decentralization evolves and how it actually things get built. And this is it's a fascinating story of the early days of Ethereum. It came out.
I just bought it.
We do have charismatic leader.
Of course. No, and most projects
maybe
do.
This should be one of the ingredients or a requirement in order to crystallize this kind of governance.
Most projects do, I guess. But the one thing that I want to add, because on DAOs we're also talking about open source, and just to talk about it for 1 second, the problem with open source, or a problem, has been a lack of monetization. And in some ways we're living in the golden age of open source monetization, where you've got lots of projects that are able to monetize it by selling consulting services or hosting. And I think there's never been more monetization for open source than now, but that still is a tiny fraction of the overall projects. And so I think there is an opportunity for a lot of developers to actually earn reasonable livings from open source. And that's one of the problems that Fluence Labs is solving, is actually tracking on our decentralized peer-to-peer network, tracking the use of open source projects and components on blockchain. And whenever open source components are used, the authors share in some of the hosting revenue. So people don't pay more, there's not a fee associated with it, but you effectively share in the hosting revenue, and that's agreed up front and with the host, done via smart contract. And so we think that actually provides the opportunity for developers all around the world who otherwise wouldn't have access to funding to potentially secure, no one's buying a boat with this, right? There'll be small payments, but support themselves and families with while writing open source usable code.
Does it occur automatically, or you have to follow the footsteps of the users and bring the fees into the project?
No, I mean, no, the way it works is if you go onto the Fluence protocol and you want to actually build something on it, if you select components, there will be a hosting fee associated with those components, and that's what you'll decide if you're going to pay it or not. And if you do, and it makes sense because you have to host it somewhere unless you host it yourself, which is fine and a different thing. But if you host it's hosted on Fluence, then some of that goes from the actual host directly to the authors. So you as a user, as developer, don't see it at all.
How do you define the development of this component? Once you use this component and you build something on top, and some other person come and take both parts.
No, it's exactly right. Well, it's as long as you're using component on Fluence, that use is tracked. You use it and then someone copies your program and builds on top of it, which you can do on Fluence, that's all tracked. If you copy it, edit it, the actual component, and rehost it on Fluence, then that's a different thing. And then that you then may earn from that.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Sounds like a
I'm
cool
most
project.
concerned. I'm most concerned of the one word of DAO, of the the acronym of DAO is the autonomous one. I think it's raised a lot of fear and somehow lack of control once we're dealing with. I think it's a bad I don't know term to use. Decentralized autonomous
is it an inaccurate term? Is the term inaccurate? And staying with you,
I
is
think
the term
it's
wrong?
inaccurate, and I think it's we're shooting in our legs because it's frightened a lot of organization even to think of any application that use DAOs in this kind of one way or the other. And I think it freaks out people, regulators, to say the least.
Yeah, I think though people like being freaked out. So I mean, often that's like with the term artificial intelligence. In a way, it's a bad term because I mean, AI is not really artificial. It's part of nature, like everything else.
It's not artificial and it's not intelligent.
It makes people think of the Terminator, but on the other hand, people like to think about the Terminator, and I mean these same things that freak people out also get people interested and excited, right? So it's tricky to balance the aspects.
Yeah, but as you see, the adoption is very problematic. It's supposed to I don't know skyrocket right by now. And the adoption is very slow, only maybe in the financial DeFi, they use it more, but I thought it will be more large adoption by now, don't you think?
Of DAOs?
People like control. Yeah, people like control.
Yeah,
they want.
Well, I mean, you're talking about putting a bunch of effort into something and then throwing it out there to a bunch of random people to control. And I mean, I think the main
it's not
the
human.
main issue,
it's not human, right?
Well, I think the main issue, to be honest, to be really blunt about it, I mean, the main issue is that DAOs have become popular and well known in the cryptocurrency world, and people are making DAOs that involve tokens and liquid governance tokens, and then the bottom line is you're winding up with a DAO that you may have founded with a certain quite interesting goal in mind, and then most of the tokens are bought by people who have currency speculation in mind. So then you're like, okay, I've got to turn control over this DAO I've formulated to these people, most of whom may care only about short-term return on trading the liquid governance token. So I mean, it becomes a perverse combination of groups with quite different incentives.
How do you solve that?
And motivations, right? I mean, so that's
how do you solve that and get things done in real life?
Tokenomic design is a complex art, and I think we're just at the beginning of it. And just like just saying something is decentralized doesn't make it good, right? I mean, there can be I mean, the government of Somalia is pretty decentralized. It means there's armed mercenaries all over the place, right? So I mean, decentralized could be worse than a centralized
Yeah.
structure, or it could be better. It depends on how you construct it. And that a DAO could be really well designed, or it could be really badly designed. And most of them have not been that well designed yet. But I think we're at the early stages of architecting DAOs. And one of the aspects is how do you make it so that the community around the DAO actually is exerting their governance with the ends of the organization in mind, rather than based on their own short-term speculative goals. And I think the collection of DAOs spawned in the cryptocurrency world has not necessarily done a fantastic job of that so far. So if you create a DAO with a progressive decentralization mandate, you're always scratching your head like, when exactly do I want to turn control over to this army of crazed cryptocurrency speculators, right? And what's actually going to happen to this organization now? And
you needed a third way to use some 1970s political jargon.
I mean, it just comes down to the tokenomic and community design, right? But which has
it just comes down to that, but that's a problem that no one's really solved yet.
It has to co-evolve with the culture. Yeah, but you can, the thing is, so going back to open source, I mean, many of us on this call are old enough to remember when open source was new, and there were many arguments.
You're
like, well, this
talking
can
for
never work.
yourself,
People will never.
Yeah,
like,
wait, don't defame us. By the way, guys, we got 1 minute left, so just Ben, make your point super fast, and then we're gonna wrap up thought.
People had great logical arguments that open source could never work because everyone needed to be paid for their work, and they turned out to be wrong. Like open source flourished tremendously, right? So arguments why DAOs cannot work, you could also make coherent arguments that way that I think will also turn out to be wrong. And just as open source found a workable path, I think DAOs will find a workable path. We're part way along that.
Okay,
route.
that's your final word. Israel, give it to me.
Well, I have to say that in my vision, DAOs supposed to somehow become the future corporate. But the way the adoption is developing these days, it seems very futuristic. And I will argue that maybe we should go to the path that we don't have to implement the DAO, as a whole. Not won't see the DAO as black and white. We don't need to have the whole organization, autonomous organization. Maybe we could create only the R&D within a corporate, existing corporate, or somehow regular,
like a hybrid
corporate
organization.
As part of the organization will operate as autonomous organization. And
interesting. Okay, that was the final word. Tom, 30 seconds, go.
Yeah, listen, I'm a fan of DAOs for sure, but I'm more excited about open source, and I'm more excited about the opportunity for developers to continue to have, intrinsic reasons for developing code, but also being able to benefit when that code is used and have some level of reward for it. And I think that will lead to an open source explosion like we haven't yet seen. So I think actually the biggest days of open source are still ahead of us.
Beautiful. All right, I want to thank our expert panel. Thank you for being on Africa Blockchain Week. Our topic was DAOs and open source software. It was stimulating, it was fast moving, it was good. And everyone have a wonderful day, and see you online and see you in person.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you very much.
See you all soon.
Right.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.